From 1874 to 1932, the Whitford family of Clay County, Kentucky, lived without a single reflective surface in their home. No mirrors, no polished tin, no glass left bare at night. They were not poor. There were windows in every room, but each was veiled in black cloth before sunset. Guests were asked to surrender pocket mirrors or empty cigarette tins at the door. The county sheriff once described the interior of the Whitford homestead as a house that refused to look back at you. 3 generations. No exceptions. No explanation that survived in the official record. If you have heard of a similar custom where you live, tell me in the comments and let me know what year it was still practiced. The earliest written trace comes from the Clay County marriage ledger, July 18th, 1874. The groom, Elijah Whitford, 23, lists his occupation as timber cooper, his literacy as partial, and his residence as Whitford Hollow, 6 miles east of Manchester. Under the section for household effects brought into union, a clerk has written, in red pencil, "Mirror, none, by vow." There is no other record in that decade where the absence of a mirror is noted. The vow is not explained, nor is it clear whether the phrase came from the groom, the bride, or the clerk himself. What is clear is that the entry is bracketed in the margin with the initials CP, possibly those of Curtis Pennington, the county registrar at the time, alongside a small symbol resembling an eye with a line struck through it. No other marriage record in the 1870s bears that symbol. 2 years later, in the county probate inventory for the estate of Martha Whitford, Elijah's mother, there is a similar annotation. Among the listed possessions, 2 walnut chairs, a spinning wheel, a cedar chest, 1 quilt blue pattern, and again in red pencil, "No mirrors kept in residence by old law." The phrase old law is unusual. Probate inventories typically list items without commentary. A search through adjoining counties shows no statute referring to household mirrors. The handwriting matches the marriage ledger, suggesting that Curtis Pennington, if he was the clerk, was the first and perhaps only person to codify the absence of mirrors as part of the Whitford record. The probate page is otherwise unremarkable, until you notice the faint grey shadow of erased text beneath the entry for the cedar chest. Under magnification, the erased words appear to read, "Glass pane turned to wall, covered in dark cloth, unbroken." The church tithing list from the same year includes the Whitford family, but with an unusual note in the margin, "Keeps house dark after sundown." In most cases, such notations refer to frugality or eccentricity, but here it aligns with the pattern emerging from county records, the deliberate elimination of reflective surfaces. The list, written in Reverend Amos Shelton's steady hand, has one final comment beside Elijah's name: "They do not bring the likeness into the room." What likeness he meant and why it could not be brought indoors is never clarified in the church archives. In the summer of 1876, a travelling schoolteacher named Lydia Harper boarded for 2 weeks with the Whitfords while the district school was being repaired. Her diary, preserved in the Clay County Historical Society, contains 3 brief entries about her stay. The first notes the house as tidy, if dim, and mentions that the windows were covered each evening with great care as though expecting a storm. The second describes the children, 2 girls and a boy, as polite, quiet, and quick to lower their eyes if I approached with my hand mirror. On the 3rd evening, Harper writes of attempting to comb her hair by lamplight and finding that her compact mirror had been removed from her satchel. She assumed it was misplaced until the eldest Whitford daughter returned it wrapped in a strip of dark fabric and asked her with solemn urgency, "Don't open it indoors, Miss Lydia." Harper did not ask why. A neighbour's letter from the following year reinforces the pattern. Written by a farmer named Simon Webb to his cousin in Lee County, it describes the Whitfords as a curious sort, Christian enough but bound by a rule I don't reckon the Bible gave them. He recalls that during a hog butchering, Elijah Whitford refused to stand where the midday sun struck the blade of a skinning knife. When asked if he feared the glare would blind him, Elijah only replied, "It's not the glare that harms you, Simon. It's the looking back. Webb adds, almost as an afterthought, that the Whitfords' barn doors were painted with wide black bands that ran horizontal across the middle, so a man couldn't catch his own shape in the gloss. County school attendance logs from 1878 reveal a small but telling omission. The Whitford children are marked present for each quarterly visit from the district inspector, but on the day designated for likeness records, a practice where each child's profile was traces, D on paper for size comparisons, only the Whitford column is left blank. The inspector's notes contain a small ink blot beside their names, with the words "exempt, parental grounds" written faintly above it. No explanation accompanies the exemption, and no other family in the district claimed one. By 1880, the U.S. Census records list the Whitford household without any unusual notation, save for one, again in the hand of the enumerator. Window glass present but obscured. Children avert eyes when addressed directly. In a decade when census takers often scribbled opinions in margins, this choice of words is oddly restrained, as though the enumerator felt bound to record only what could not be mistaken for opinion. Still, the thread continues. Each glimpse into the Whitford home life confirms the absence of reflection, and each document hints at a rule that predates memory. In October of 1881, the Clay County School Inspector filed his annual facilities report. Tucked between the summaries for District 3 and District 5 was an unnumbered page referencing a home inspection at Whitford Hollow. It notes the presence of a large parlour mirror covered in muslin and nailed at four corners, contradicting every prior record that insisted no mirrors were kept in residence. The inspector's remark, in clear breach of parental testimony to church and county, is underlined twice. Yet beside this, in a different hand and darker ink, another note appears. Object in question not a mirror, surface not glass. There is no clarification, nor does the report specify what the surface was made of. 2 months later, a sheriff's confiscation log records the seizure of household goods from the Whitford property in settlement of a debt. The list includes 3 chairs, a broken spinning wheel, a tin washtub, and 1 wall-mounted glass. But in the margin, the word glass has been struck through in red and replaced with pane. The same entry shows a resale value of 0.0, which is unusual. Auctioned goods were typically appraised, even if damaged. The pane itself is never listed again in county auction records, and no buyer's receipt can be found. The contradictions deepen in a church report from 1882. Reverend Amos Shelton writes that the Whitford family remains diligent in their tithes, steadfast in their avoidance of the likeness indoors. Yet that same spring, the church vestry logs an expenditure for replacement of vestry mirror gifted by Whitford household. The entry is unsigned, but the treasurer's initials appear beside the amount, 50 cents, which in 1882 would have purchased a modestly framed mirror. If the Whitfords had truly gifted such an object, it directly violates their own vow. When cross-referenced, the dates of these records overlap. In the span of less than a year, the Whitfords are described as having no mirrors, having a covered mirror, and gifting a mirror to the church. It is possible the pane in the inspector's note was a window glass mistaken for a mirror, or that the church's entry referred to a looking glass purchased on their behalf. Yet the repetition of correction marks, red pencil striking out glass in county logs, margins filled with alternate descriptions, suggests something else. As if the officials themselves were unsure what they had seen and were adjusting the record to fit the Whitfords' own rules. In the spring of 1885, the Clay County Historical Society received a donation from a travelling portrait photographer named Horace Bell. Among the glass plate negatives in his estate was a single mislabeled image. Whitford Hollow, 1885, Reunion. The photograph shows 15 people posed in front of a 2-story clapboard house, its windows covered in dark cloth despite the clear daylight. The Whitford family occupies the centre, flanked by 2 visiting households from neighbouring Laurel County. Bell's studio notes, found in a separate ledger, indicate that the exposure was taken with an 8 by 10 inch wet plate camera at f/32, 15 seconds in open shade. He makes no comment on difficulty except for one remark in the margin. Central subjects lacked light in the eyes. Reflector failed. In photographic practice of the time, a reflector was used to bounce sunlight into the subjects' faces, producing small white highlights in the pupils, known as catchlights. The absence of these highlights in every Whitford face is notable, particularly because the two Laurel County guests, positioned at the edges of the group, show clear, crisp catchlights. 15 years later, in 1900, the Society attempted to make a silver gelatin print from Bell's original plate. The technician's report survives in the Society's archive, on paper now yellowed and brittle. It reads, "Emulsion stable. Exposure normal. Central subjects underexposed only at ocular highlight region. No visible cause in negative. Retouching attempted. Unsuccessful." A second attempt was made using magnesium flash powder to create a contact print with boosted contrast, but the result was the same. The Whitford pupils remained flat, lightless, and without the telltale glint seen in every other subject of the era. This discrepancy was quietly filed under technical anomalies in the Society's catalogue. Yet the date of the attempted reprint coincides with another document, a request from the Clay County School Board for likeness renewal on the Whitford children, now grown. The board received no response. The file ends with a notation in pencil. "Family in Laurel County for harvest. No likeness supplied." This repeated refusal, combined with the peculiar photographic evidence, added another unspoken rule to the growing Whitford mystery. Refusal not just of mirrors, but of any image that could hold their reflection. In the summer of 1909, a different traveling photographer, Samuel D. Carter of Harlan County, passed through Whitford Hollow offering family portraits for 50 cents a sitting. Carter's surviving account book records the Whitfords as reluctant, finally consenting, with the condition that the photograph be taken outdoors and that no mirrors or reflective props be used. The resulting print, preserved in a private collection until the late 1960s, shows the third generation of the family gathered in front of the same house seen in Bell's 1885 plate. The window coverings are still present, now faded and frayed at the edges. Carter's technical notes are sparse but telling, bright, even light, subject steady, no glare. The lack of glare is unremarkable, until one compares this 1909 image with Bell's 1885 plate. In both, the Whitford faces share the same uncanny trait. Their pupils remain utterly flat, black pools without a trace of reflected light, despite the clear midday sun. The two hired farmhands in the background, however, show normal highlights. Side-by-side analysis in 1968 by amateur historian Marvin Ellison revealed that the alignment of the Whitford children in the 1885 photo and the Whitford adults in 1909 suggests some may be the same individuals, unchanged in posture, height, and even clothing style. Ellison noted, perhaps hyperbolically, that either the Whitfords dressed their descendants in their grandparents' clothes or something stranger was at work. The most troubling part of Carter's record lies in a small slip of paper tucked between the pages of his account book, written in hurried pencil. Catchlights absent. Eyes matte. Shutter fine. Plate fine. Must be in the eyes. Carter never returned to Whitford Hollow, and his surviving correspondence contains no further mention of the family. The photograph, passed quietly among local collectors, became an object of whispered speculation in the region, a likeness that didn't look back, as one Laurel County barber reportedly called it. By the winter following Carter's visit, the Clay County Board of Education issued a formal request for updated likenesses of all school-age children, part of a statewide initiative to standardize attendance records. Every family in Whitford Hollow complied, except the Whitfords. The inspector's log for that year contains only a single remark beside their entry: parental refusal, grounds not stated, children withdrawn from term. This withdrawal marks the end of any official educational record for the Whitford line in the county. In early 1911, the Clay County Parish Register records the baptism of an infant, Anna Mae Whitford, at the small clapboard church in Whitford Hollow. The entry is routine, date, parent names, officiant, until the final column, where the usual note, family likeness taken, is replaced with likeness waived by vow. This phrasing mirrors the 1874 marriage ledger almost word for word, suggesting that the vow had not only persisted, but become formalized language within the church record itself. The officiating minister, Reverend Thomas Price, signs his name in a tight, deliberate hand, but there is a faint impression of another word under vow, erased but still legible in the right light: old. Someone had initially written by old vow, then removed the modifier. That same month, the Clay County Health Board initiate a door-to-door census of household hygiene, part of a state effort to reduce infectious disease. The inspector assigned to Whitford Hollow filed a report listing the Whitford home as exceptionally clean, but added a peculiar observation: windows curtained on all sides, black cloth tacked down, no reflective cookingware observed, kettle blackened intentionally. This entry was later annotated in the margin, not by the inspector but by the board's secretary. If no glass, how explain pane found in parlour? This annotation references an earlier county facilities note from decades prior, showing that the contradiction had been circulating across departments for years. The deeper conflict surfaces in the spring of 1912, when the church vestry minutes show a line item: donation received, polished brass candlesticks 2. The donor is listed as E. Whitford Estate. But the same month, the county court record for probate lists the identical candlesticks as tarnished, not reflective. The fact that the church described them as polished, while the county described them as dull, could be a matter of opinion, or a sign that one record was altered after the fact. The dates on both documents match exactly, but the inks differ, and the handwriting on the county record shows a lighter pressure, as if written quickly over an erasure. By this point, the paper trail begins to take on the shape of two parallel narratives, one maintained by the church, which appears to respect and preserve the Whitford's vow, and another maintained by the county, which keeps tripping over evidence that contradicts it. Each side seems aware of the other, but neither addresses the discrepancy outright. Instead, corrections multiply, language shifts subtly, and the true nature of the Whitford's ban on reflections remains suspended between these two sets of files, never fully documented, never fully denied. In the autumn of 1914, following the death of Elijah Whitford's eldest son, county probate officials were dispatched to catalogue the family's belongings for tax purposes. Most of the listed items were unremarkable: a corn crib, a butter churn, a Bible bound in cracked leather, 6 quilts, all meticulously described in the clerk's rounded hand. But in the margin of page 3, there is a smaller, almost hesitant entry, bracketed apart from the rest. Found in attic, cloth-wrapped parcel, approx. 18 inches square. Contained 1 fragment of glass with lead backing, edges filed smooth, stored in cedar box. Accompanied by folded paper, illegible in part. The fragment is never referred to as a mirror in the probate file, though lead-backed glass was the common material for mirrors of the period. The folded paper, according to the clerk's note, bore a single line in faded pencil: "Do not return the looking." The words are in a looping hand not consistent with the clerk's own, and there is no record of any effort to identify the writer. The note was logged as retained by family at their request, an allowance that, on paper, contradicts the usual procedure of transferring all estate items to county custody for appraisal. This attic find reappears 5 years later in a church vestry record from 1919 which documents the rectal type of a silvered panel cracked with cloth wrap intact. The object is described as being placed in the church storeroom until such time as it may be cleansed or made fit for display. No mention is made of the accompanying note, nor is the donor named outright. Only the initials AW appear in the margin. Within a year, the panel vanishes from church inventory altogether. In its place is a penciled line: "Item removed, see correspondence." That correspondence, if it survives, has not been located. When a local historian examined the probate entry in the 1950s, he found traces of another note that had been erased from the margin beside the cloth-wrapped parcel description. Using sidelighting, he deciphered 3 words. Reflection did not. The sentence was never completed, and whether it referred to the shard's physical properties or something witnessed in it remains unknown. By the early 1920s, the Whitfords' presence in official records had thinned to occasional property filings and church mentions. Yet in those sparse entries, a strange linguistic echo began to appear. 3 words, always in reference to household possessions or ceremonies, no likeness kept. The first occurrence is in a 1921 fire insurance application filed by a distant cousin who had inherited part of the Whitford land. In the inventory of insurable contents, next to looking glasses, the word none is entered, followed by no likeness kept, in a smaller, tighter hand, almost as if it had been squeezed in after the fact. The same year, the church marriage ledger for a neighbouring family records the Whitfords as witnesses. Their names are written clearly, but in the remarks column, beside the description of the reception, is the notation, no likeness kept within hall. This is an odd thing to note for a wedding reception, and nothing else in the ledger suggests an inspection of the hall's furnishings. It stands alone, without explanation, as if whoever wrote it was compelled to mark the absence. In 1923, the phrase surfaces again, this time in a Clay County Sheriff's report about stolen goods from a travelling peddler. Among the recovered items is a hand mirror, which the report notes was declined by claimant, states no likeness kept. The refusal is strange enough, but the choice to echo the exact phrasing from prior, unrelated documents suggests a shared vocabulary, either one learned by local officials dealing with the Whitfords, or one used deliberately by the Whitfords themselves when dealing with outsiders. When these records are compared, the handwriting differs, the contexts differ, and yet the words remain exact. No likeness kept. Over time, the phrase seems to have become a kind of official shorthand, as if it belonged in the same category as no livestock present or no taxes in arrears. It is never expanded upon, never explained. It simply appears, as though everyone involved understood exactly what it meant, and understood that it needed no further comment. In the autumn of 1925, a state agricultural survey crew passed through Whitford Hollow to document family farms for a soil and crop study. As part of the survey, each property was photographed alongside its owners, a practice intended to help future inspectors identify farmsteads without relying solely on maps. The surviving contact prints from that survey are clear and well composed, except for the Whitford image. This here, photograph shows 3 adults and 2 children standing in front of a split-rail fence. The field behind them is crisp, the sky bright, every blade of grass sharp. But where the sun should have caught in their eyes, there is nothing. No pinpoint glare, no glassy depth. Just the same matte darkness seen in the Bell and Carter portraits decades earlier. The photographer's log notes, in the mechanical shorthand common to state surveyors, expert normal was plate clear found subject, ocular reflent absent. On the back of the print, in faint pencil, is the phrase, no likeness kept. This is the only instance in the entire agricultural archive where a photograph bears that phrase. The context is otherwise mundane, crop yields, acreage, soil type, but the note reads less like a description of missing property and more like a diagnosis of what the camera failed to capture. The survey's lead photographer, a man named James Galloway, submitted an equipment report the following week, assuring the state that his lenses were clean, plates fresh, and exposure times consistent. His only concession to the anomaly was a line near the end. Suspect subject, condition, not instrument fault. Less than a year later, in 1926, a county clerk updated the Whitford property tax file. Under the remarks section, wedged between 2 lines about boundary markers, appear the words, likeness not maintained in dwelling. This phrasing, while slightly altered, carries the same cadence as "no likeness kept," suggesting that by now the rule had become part of the county's unwritten lexicon for the family. Even as the Whitfords withdrew from public life, the record keepers, photographers, surveyors, clerks, couldn't help but repeat those words, as if they were marking not just an absence in the home, but an absence in the people themselves. By 1929, the Whitford household was down to 6 members, 3 adults and 3 children, all recorded in the Clay County census without occupation, though one adult male was noted as occasional timber work. That census page carries an unusual pencil annotation beside the family name, "Photograph declined per vow." This was not standard practice. Census takers rarely offered to photograph households, let alone note refusals. It's possible the enumerator was aware of the family's reputation and decided to record the rejection for his own sense of completeness. The following year, the County Health Board issued a blanket order requiring identification cards for all residents over the age of 12. Each card included a small photograph taken on site. The Whitfords, summoned along with every other household in the district, failed to appear on their assigned date. A second notice was sent, this time hand-delivered by Sheriff Curtis Malone. His report, preserved in the county archive, reads in part, "Family home, curtains drawn, no entry granted. Male voice through door stated, 'We keep no likeness.' Offered to pay fine in cash. Declined photograph." Malone's tone is procedural, but in the margin, a second hand has added, "Same as there, fathers." In 1931, the church burial register records the death of Mary Whitford, age 58. In the remarks column, instead of the usual family-provided likeness, there is only "no likeness per old vow." This is the last known use of the old vow wording in church records. By the following year, the Whitfords vanish entirely from the parish rolls. County directories from 1933 list the house at Whitford Hollow as vacant. An inventory taken that same summer, when the property was seized for back taxes, shows the house nearly empty. Furniture worn, farm tools rusted, curtains still nailed over every window. The only anomalous entry is on the final page. 1 box, cedar, locked. Contents not inventoried. Family name carved underside. No key was found. The box itself disappears from county storage logs within months. In the blank space where its entry should have been, a clerk later penciled, "No likeness inside." Whether this was a literal statement or a final nod to the family's vow is impossible to determine. The last official trace of the Whitfords appears in a 1934 Clay County correspondence file between the Sheriff's Office and the State Tax Commission. A typed letter from Sheriff Malone confirms the property at Whitford Hollow has been transferred to county ownership, and structures raised due to advanced decay. Attached to the letter is a hand-drawn map showing the boundaries of the parcel. No buildings, only the faint outline of where the house once stood. In the lower right corner of the map, drawn in pencil rather than ink, is a small rectangle labelled simply "Looking Room." No such room was ever mentioned in earlier records, and the handwriting does not match Malone's. 2 months later, the State Archive receives a thin envelope from the Clay County Clerk's Office containing miscellaneous notes re Whitford family. The packet holds only 3 items: a torn page from what appears to be a household ledger, listing cloth for covers and tack nails, a receipt for 1 pane silvered, and a scrap of paper no larger than a matchbox bearing the words, "Do not bring the second self." The phrasing recalls both the attic shard's note and the century-long refrain of "no likeness kept." After 1934, the file closes without formal conclusion. There is no final judgment, no death notices for the last family members, no deed transfer to private hands. The county's own index card for the Whitford Hollow parcel contains only 2 words in the remarks column: "No likeness." The absence of closure feels deliberate, as if the officials who kept this thread alive for 60 years chose not to tie it off. Whether out of respect, fear, or simply the exhaustion of chasing a tradition older than the paper it's written on, the record ends not with an answer, but with the same negation it began with. The house is gone. The family is gone. The vow remains, unbroken, in the margins. If I'll follow the paper trail from the first red-penciled note in 1874 to the last penciled remark in 1934, you see the same shape repeating, not in the people, but in the record itself. Different hands, different inks, different offices, all writing toward the same absence. No likeness kept, no mirror in the room, no reflection looking back. It is tempting to read it as superstition, some Appalachian ward against spirits in the glass. Just as easy to frame it as the residue of trauma, a family convinced that to hold your image was to invite harm or judgment, or the return of something you'd rather leave buried. But the details don't line up neatly enough for any one explanation. The pane covered in muslin, not glass but something unnamed. The photographs where light catches every other face except theirs. The lead-backed shard that does not tarnish, wrapped away in cedar. Even the officials who tried to force compliance, school inspectors, surveyors, sheriffs, ended up adopting the family's own language, as if the vow could be inherited simply by writing it down. Whatever the Whitfords were keeping out of their home, it stayed out long enough to leave them without a documented face for 3 generations. That absence is now the only thing they've left behind. The rest, how it began, what they saw that made them swear it, whether it ended when the house came down, lives in the space where a reflection should be. If you've ever heard of a family, anywhere in the world, that lived without mirrors, I want to know about it. Tell me where, tell me when, and tell me if they ever gave you a reason. And if you've got an old photograph where someone should be looking back at you and isn't, send it my way. Because sometimes the most unsettling thing you can see is nothing at all. In the county archive, there exists a small envelope, unmarked on the outside except for a catalogue number written in modern blue ink. Inside is a folded sheet torn from a larger ledger. Its paper is brittle, the edges browned and flaking. The ink, a soft iron gall faded to brown. The top of the sheet reads, in looping 19th century script, Inventory, Parlour. Beneath that, a short list. Settee, 2 chairs, lampstand, cloth screen, piano stool. The 5th line has been neatly crossed out, leaving only the faint tail of a letter visible. In the margin, a note in another hand, struck per vow. Archivists have speculated that the crossed-out item may have been mirror or glass, but the stroke is so heavy that the original word cannot be fully recovered. The note, struck per vow, appears nowhere else in the county's ledgers, as if it was a phrase unique to this one clerk, who understood enough of the family's history to abbreviate it in that way. An unrelated file from the same decade contains a bill of sale for a set of silver-plated utensils purchased by a Whitford cousin in Manchester. A penciled annotation at the bottom of the bill reads, "Returned, polish removed, buyer satisfied." The notion of removing the polish from silverware before accepting it might seem harmless, but it is consistent with a household that avoids any gleam or reflection. A similar pattern can be found in the account of a tinsmith, who claimed the Whitfords refused to buy his wares unless he could prove the interiors had been blackened with soot. "I did as they asked," his letter reads, "and they paid without haggling. Said it was for comfort of the room." By layering these small pieces, a crossed-out ledger entry here, a returned polished item there, the story begins to feel less like a superstition imposed at rare moments, and more like a rule integrated into every transaction, every choice of material. Even when they were not speaking of the vow, the Whitfords were enforcing it, bending the shape of their daily life around a reflection they would not allow. In April of 1917, a carpenter named Jonas Hembry submitted a brief handwritten invoice to the Clay County Courthouse for repair of interior panelling and floorboard replacement, Whitford Hollow Residence. The main body of the invoice is routine, a list of measurements, the type of pine used, the cost of nails and varnish. But in the lower margin, beneath the sum total, Hembry scrawled a single line, "Didn't know they had a room like that." There is no elaboration, no hint at what made the room unusual, but the phrase stands out for two reasons. First, the Whitford house was well known in the county for its simple floor plan, repeated in oral accounts for decades: parlour, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, loft. No extra room was ever mentioned in census or tax documents. Second, Hembry's invoice lists an unusually high number of tacks for the job. 4 full boxes, far more than would be needed for floorboards alone. A letter found years later in Hembry's personal papers offers a little more. Addressed to his brother in Breathitt County, it describes the Whitford job in casual detail until one paragraph, where the handwriting tightens and the sentences shorten. "They had me fix boards in the far room," he wrote. "Windows there, but all covered same as the rest. Walls different. Looked like they'd been scratched, but not by any tool I know. Long marks, close together, higher than a man could reach without a ladder. Asked if they wanted them sanded out. They said no. Said cover them." Whether this far room was the same space later labelled as the looking room on Sheriff Malone's map is impossible to confirm. But the clues align. Covered windows. An unusual volume of tacks. An insistence on covering rather than repairing whatever marred the walls. The invoice itself would have been unremarkable without the letter, but together they form an early half-lit view of a part of the Whitford house that the public record almost entirely ignored, until the very end. In 1962, a regional folklorist named Daniel Whitley conducted a series of interviews with older residents of Clay County, gathering stories about unusual customs and superstitions in the Cumberland foothills. Among the reel-to-reel tapes in Whitley's archive is a half-hour conversation with a woman identified only as Mrs. H, age 82. Based on property records and local genealogies, she was almost certainly Martha Higgins, who had grown up on a farm less than a mile from Whitford Hollow. Her voice on the tape is creaky but steady, carrying the sing-song lilt of the mountains. Asked about the Whitfords, she laughs once, softly, and says, "Never did see myself in their house, and I mean that both ways." She recalls being invited inside once as a child, sometime around 1904, when her mother delivered eggs to the Whitford women. "Dark as a pocket in there," she says. "Curtains pulled so tight you'd think it was snowing in July." She claims she didn't notice the lack of mirrors until she caught her own dim outline in the glass front of a cupboard, only for one of the Whitford daughters to step between her and the reflection, close the cupboard and mutter, "Not in here." Mrs. H also speaks of a room she called the far room, which her mother told her never to enter. She says she glimpsed it once when the door was ajar. "Couldn't see much for the cloth hanging down, but there was something on the wall, like streaks or strippings, all running up and down, not sideways, and a smell like wet pennies." When Whitley presses her for more detail, she grows quiet and says, "Don't matter now. They're gone. House is gone. But I don't look in them old kinds of glass no more, just in case." Whitley's own handwritten notes in the tape box include 2 underlined phrases: "far room" and "wet pennies." No attempt was made to connect this account to the Hembry invoice or Sheriff Malone's later map, likely because Whitley was collecting folklore, not conducting a formal investigation. Still, Mrs. H.'s words offer a rare human recollection that threads directly into the fabric of the surviving documents. In the March 6, 1915 edition of the Manchester Courier, a brief column in the County Items section carried a curious note sandwiched between reports of a barn fire in Fogartown and a church supper in Oneida. It read, "During the probate inventory of the Whitford estate, an item of unusual composition was found and retained by the family at their request. Described as a pane of silvered material, the object was wrapped in black cloth and bore an inscription the officials declined to comment upon. Witnesses report it was carried from the attic to the parlour before removal." No follow-up appeared in subsequent issues, and the clipping exists now only in a bound volume of the year's papers stored in the Clay County Library basement. When the Courier was digitized in the 1980s, this short piece was missing from the microfilm reels. The page number jumped from the barn fire report to the church supper notice with no visible break. The bound copy, however, still holds the text, faded but legible. Librarians have speculated that the omission may have been accidental, a quirk of microfilming that skipped a column, but the surrounding columns show no similar losses. The attic shard's description in the article matches the probate ledger nearly word for word, right down to the phrase, pane of silvered material. But there is one subtle difference. The newspaper calls it unusual composition, suggesting that either the appearance or the substance of the shard was not what the officials expected. The lack of detail is frustratingly deliberate, as if the reporter was told not to elaborate. Given that the Whitfords were a reclusive family whose odd customs were local gossip for decades, it's remarkable that the Courier printed the mention at all. This single paragraph, printed and then effectively erased from the more accessible archives, is one of the few public-facing accoutrements. And it's of the shard before it vanished entirely from church and county records. It also marks the first time the object is associated with a movement from attic to parlour, hinting that it was not a fixed piece of furniture, but something deliberately stored away, only to be brought down for reasons no one recorded. In 1922, a single-page document labelled Specimen Examination Private appears in the back of a Clay County property file, unindexed and without an official case number. The paper is thin, slightly translucent, as if taken from a bound lab notebook rather than standard county stock. The heading lists the examining body as Kentucky School of Mines and Metallurgy, Lexington, and the subject simply as lead-backed panel fragment. There is no mention of the Whitfords, but the listed dimensions, approx 18 inches by irregular 11 inches, match the probate clerk's 1914 attic entry exactly. The typed section describes the silvering as stable under abrasion and the backing as pre-standard composition, with trace elements inconsistent with domestic manufacture. Below that, in smaller type, it notes, no visible image retained when placed opposite light source. No standard reflection observed. The language is clinical, but the conclusion is baffling. Specimen surface exhibits absorption of incident light with no diffuse or specular return under test conditions. In plain terms, when a lamp or daylight was directed at the shard, nothing bounced back, not even the faintest shimmer one would expect from unpolished metal or aged glass. At the bottom of the page, in a faint pencil hand, different from the typed text, are 3 words: reflection did not. This is identical to the incomplete phrase found erased in the probate ledger margin years earlier. Whether the same person wrote it or whether it had become an unofficial label for the shard is impossible to say, but the recurrence is striking. The file contains no cover letter, no chain of custody, and no indication of how or why the shard came to be examined at a metallurgy school. The only surviving clue is a faint stamp in the lower right corner. Return to Reverend P. No minister with a surname beginning with P appears in Whitford Hollows parish records after 1919, suggesting the shard had already left the county by the time it underwent testing. From there, its trail vanishes. In the mid-1930s, a former assistant to the Clay County Historical Society, a man named Raymond Talbot, claimed in a private letter to have once seen the mirror that wasn't on display for a single afternoon in the Society's reading room. The letter, written in 1954 to a cousin in Hazard, was discovered among Talbot's personal papers after his death. He describes arriving early to catalogue donated farm implements when he found the object resting on an easel, its black cloth folded neatly beside it. It was no bigger than a school slate, he wrote, and had the weight of stone more than glass. Looked straight at it, and it was like looking into cold water at night. No sky, no face, nothing. Talbot claims that one of the Society's board members, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Dalrymple, attempted to photograph the shard that afternoon using a Kodak folding camera. According to Talbot, she made 3 exposures with different lighting, one with the window light at her back, one with the lamp at her side, and one directly overhead. None of them took, he wrote. On the prints, the stand was there, the cloth was there, even the wall behind it was there. But where the pane sat, just a hole. White paper, no shape at all. No such photographs exist in the Society's surviving collection. There is also no official log of the shard ever being received, displayed, or returned. Talbot himself admits in the letter that Mrs. Dalrymple wrapped it back up and sent it off with a man from the church, though he does not identify which church or what became of the parcel. His tone suggests that even at the time, the event felt half secret, half accidental, a thing stumbled upon rather than sanctioned. If true, Talbot's account would make the shard the only inanimate object in the Whitford story to share the same photographic anomaly as the family portraits, an absence where reflection should be. But like so many pieces of the Whitford record, it survives only as a claim in a private letter, unsupported by any physical evidence. Still, it aligns with the same impossible pattern: light enters but nothing comes back. In the spring of 1928, during a county-wide building inspection for fire safety compliance, an inspector named John Mallory filed a report on the Whitford property that was unlike any of his other assignments. The typed summary lists the usual measurements: chimney height, distance from outbuildings, condition of roof shingles, but appended at the bottom is a paragraph marked "Verbal exchange not to be entered in main ledger." In it, Mallory recounts being escorted through the house by a man he identified as Deacon Thomas Hill, a church officer and distant Whitford relation. When they reached a narrow hallway at the back of the house, Mallory noted a door with 2 horizontal boards nailed across it, the nails driven in from the outside. He asked if the room was in use. Hill replied, "It is not to be opened." Mallory pressed the issue, citing the county's requirement to inspect all rooms for fire hazards. Hill told him the family would pay the inspection fee and any fine necessary, but the door would remain shut. Mallory's addendum goes on. "When I suggested removal of the boards for the sake of compliance, the deacon stood in front of the door, folded his hands and said, 'You'd see nothing useful in there.' His tone was calm, but final. Mallory chose not to force entry, noting that the boards appeared older than the current decade, their paint faded and chipped. In the margin of his addendum, in pencil and likely in his own hand, he added 3 words: "Far room, sealed." This is the only known instance of a non-family member physically blocking access to the far room on behalf of the Whitfords. It also marks the first time that church and county interests clashed openly in writing over a specific part of the house. The church, through Deacon Hill, seemed willing to shoulder financial penalties rather than let the county see what was behind that door. The report was filed, with the fine paid in cash within a week, and no follow-up inspection was ever attempted. The far room remained sealed, its contents, if any, left unrecorded. In 1913, a handwritten case note from Dr. Nathaniel C. Latham, a country physician who served Clay and Laurel counties, records a house call to the Whitford residents for fever in male child approx 7 years. The notes are brief at first: temperature taken, laudanum administered, fluids recommended. But halfway down the page, the doctor's pen slows and the handwriting sharpens, as though he wanted to capture his next observation with precision. He writes, "Child was lying in bed in the rear chamber, 2 windows present but heavily shrouded in black cloth nailed to frame. No air movement, light from lamp only. Asked to examine windows for ventilation, but mother declined, saying, 'Those panes are not for looking.'" Latham describes attempting to lift one corner of the cloth anyway, under the pretense of letting in fresh air. "Felt no draught," he notes, and found surface behind cloth to be smooth and cold to the touch, as though metal-backed. Could not see through. Suspect pane, not of ordinary glass. Before he could continue, the mother, likely Anna Whitford, took hold of his wrist and guided his hand back down, repeating, "Not for looking." The doctor concludes the note with a small boxed annotation, unusual for his otherwise plain records: 2 panes in far chamber identical in feel to silvered glass, but without reflection. Did not pursue further at family's request. This is the earliest known professional account of any fixture inside the far room being made of a reflective material that nonetheless failed to show a reflection. It predates the attic shard's documented appearance by a year, suggesting the shard might once have been part of one of these very window panes. If so, it would mean the far room contained not just one such surface, but at least two, long before the house began sealing itself off from outside inspection. In the winter of 1921, a farmer named Eli Combs told a story to a neighbor that was later recorded in a Works Progress Administration folklore interview. Combs claimed he had been returning from Manchester after a livestock auction, passing Whitford Hollow well after dark. There was snow on the ground, the moon was high, and most of the houses along the road showed the usual dim yellow lamplight through their curtains. But as he came abreast of the Whitford property, he noticed two faint, square shapes glowing in the far side of the house, no brighter than a lantern seen through thick fog, yet oddly steady, without the flicker of flame. Combs slowed his horse and wagon, thinking at first it was moonlight catching on uncovered glass. But the squares were too pale, almost silvery, and they seemed to hold their glow even when the moon ducked behind a cloud. Like they were lit from inside themselves, he told the WPA interviewer, but not with fire. He thought about knocking at the door, but the road was icy, and he still had miles to go. When he passed the same spot the next morning, the far wall was shrouded as usual, curtains nailed, no sign of any light source. The interviewer, a schoolteacher named Ruth Mayfield, pressed him on whether he might have seen reflections from a neighbour's lantern or a passing wagon. Combs insisted the light came from the Whitford house itself, from those covered panes in the far room. "Didn't light up the yard," he said. "Didn't spill out like a lamp would. Just sat there, like it was waiting." No other nighttime account of the far room exists in the WPA collection, but Combs's description of self-lit panes is an eerie parallel to Dr. Latham's note about surfaces smooth and cold to the touch, yet unlike ordinary glass. Whatever those fixtures were, they seemed to defy both reflection and the absence of light, holding something in or letting something faint out. In 1932, while preparing the Whitford property for auction after its seizure for unpaid taxes, a junior clerk named Paul Reeves was tasked with consolidating decades of scattered notes into a single coherent case file. His handwritten summary sheet, still preserved in the Clay County Archive, is unlike the tidy typewritten abstracts for other properties. The Whitford sheet is a palimpsest, ink over pencil, words crossed out and rewritten, margins crowded with references to older ledgers now missing. Midway down the page, under Structures, Reeves lists the main house, the barn, and a sealed chamber, far side. In parentheses he writes, "Matches map notation, looking room." This is the first and only time in an official county document that the two terms appear together. Under Contents, he notes, "Cedar box, locked, removed to courthouse." A few lines later, in smaller script, he adds, "Also parcel wrapped in black cloth, described by witness as pane, silvered, no likeness kept." That final phrase is underlined twice, as if Reeves knew it was important to carry it forward from the older records. The underlining appears in pencil, not ink, suggesting it may have been added after the summary was completed. In the margin beside it, a faint note reads, "Old vow, far room source." The question mark is heavy, the graphite darker than the rest of the page. What became of the cedar box and the cloth-wrapped pane after Reeves logged them is not recorded in the tax case file. The inventory of county storage for the following year omits both items entirely, and Reeves's name disappears from the staff list in 1934. Whether his departure was related to the Whitford file is unknown, but in that single page, the three persistent mysteries, the sealed far room, the silvered shard, and the vow against likeness, share the same cramped space for the first and last time in the public record. In 1951, nearly 2 decades after the Whitford property was seized, a short unsigned letter surfaced in a box of mixed estate papers donated to the Clay County Historical Society. The handwriting matches known samples of Paul Reeves, the junior clerk who compiled the Whitford summary sheet in 1932. The paper is lined and torn from a school composition book, the ink faded to a light brown. It is addressed simply to M, with no surname, and contains only 4 sentences. "You asked me once with so." I never put the pain back on the list. It wasn't because I lost it. It was because it wasn't lost to me. I saw myself in it once, just once, and it didn't move when I did. After that, I kept the box locked and the key with me until the day they stopped asking. There is no date, no return address, and no further explanation. The letter was bundled with unrelated church pamphlets and several receipts from the 1940s, suggesting it had been kept among personal effects rather than filed officially. The Society's accession log lists it as anonymous personal correspondence, possible Whitford relevance, but within the local history community, most accept it as Reeves's own account. If the letter is genuine, it would mean the shard, or pane, remained in Reeves's possession after it vanished from county storage, and that his reason for withholding it from the record was profoundly personal. The description of a reflection that failed to mimic the viewer's movement is unlike anything else in the Whitford file, but it echoes the deep unease in earlier witness accounts. Dr. Latham's cold, non-reflective pains, the photographs that failed to catch a glint in the eyes, and the family's obsessive vow to keep no likeness. Reeves never reappears in public directories after 1934. His burial site is unknown, and no probate records survive for his estate. If he truly kept the shard, it may have been interred with him, or passed quietly into private hands, its story reduced to a line in a letter that was never meant to be public. In the summer of 1957, a graduate student from Berea College named Helen Moritz conducted interviews across Clay County for a thesis on enduring Appalachian customs. Among her reel recordings, now housed in the Berea Special Collections, there is a brief segment with an elderly man identified as R.L. age 90. His voice is slow and deliberate, and at first he speaks only of weather patterns and corn yields. But when Moritz steers the conversation toward unusual families or traditions, his tone shifts. "You want odd?" he says. "There was a hollow where folks didn't keep a mirror for 3 lifetimes. You'd best believe it, 'cause the church wrote it down." He claims his father once helped clear the Whitford house after it was abandoned. The curtains, he says, were still nailed to the frames, and even the metal kettle had been rubbed dull with ash. "Not a shiny thing in there, except a little sliver of glass on the floor of the far room," he recalls. "Pa picked it up, looked at it a second, and put it right back down. Said it looked like it was looking at him." R.L. insists that after his father told that story, no one in their own household kept a mirror either, not for fear of spirits, but because there's things you don't invite. He says the phrase, "no likeness kept," was still understood in the county during his youth as shorthand for a private vow, even among families with no connection to the Whitfords. If you said it, folks knew to leave you be about photographs, about mirrors, about anything that'd catch your face. When Moritz asks if anyone ever explained why at the Whitfords were afraid of, R.L. laughs once dryly and says, "Wasn't about fear, was about not letting the wrong part of you get loose." He does not elaborate, and the tape cuts off shortly after. No further commentary appears in Moritz's notes, suggesting she either respected his decision not to explain or understood there was nothing more he was willing to say. In 1974, the Clay County Circuit Court heard a minor civil case involving a boundary dispute between 2 landowners in the hills east of Manchester. On the surface, the case had nothing to do with the Whitford family. Both parties were recent arrivals, and the land in question had never been part of Whitford Hollow. But buried in the exhibits file for the case is a photocopy of a handwritten lease agreement from 1969. The lease lists basic terms, monthly payment, access rights, permitted use, and then, at the bottom, a peculiar addendum in a different pen. Tenant will respect standing condition, no likeness kept inside dwelling. The landlord, called to testify, admitted under oath that he had copied the phrase from an older form, he'd been shown when he first bought the property. When pressed on what it meant, he shrugged and said, "Don't keep pictures or mirrors indoors. It's just something folks round here sometimes write down." He claimed no knowledge of the Whitfords, though one of the attorneys noted in passing that the phrase was identical to that old family's saying, drawing a brief objection from opposing counsel. The court treated the addendum as irrelevant to the dispute, but the photocopy remains in the case file. The handwriting of the addendum bears no resemblance to any known Whitford document, yet the language is too precise and too rare to be coincidence. That it appeared more than 40 years after the family vanished from the official record suggests the vow, or at least the wording, had survived in the community's memory, detached from its origin but intact in form. Whether this survival was intentional, passed quietly between households, or simply absorbed into the region's oral and written habits, is unclear. But its reappearance in a mundane legal document decades later proves the vow's language outlived the people who swore it, persisting like a shadow in the paperwork of an unrelated argument. In 2011, a retired high school history teacher named Carleen Bishop began combing through the Clay County archives with the goal of documenting lost artifacts from the county's early years. She'd heard the Whitford story in fragments growing up, always second-hand, always accompanied by the phrase, "no likeness kept." But what interested her most was the elusive shard. Bishop filed open records requests with both the county and the state archives for any mention of a pane mirror fragment or silvered panel associated with Whitford Hollow. The responses she received were hin, and in her words, deliberately incomplete. The county sent her scanned pages of the 1914 probate record with the attic item listed, but the reflection did not marginalia was cropped out of the image. When she asked for the full scan, she was told the original page was undergoing preservation treatment and unavailable for public viewing. Undeterred, Bishop began contacting private collectors in the region, especially those known to have old church or estate items. One elderly man in Laurel County claimed he had something from that house, but when she arrived, he refused to show it to her, saying only, "It's not for looking." She recorded the exchange in her research notes, underlining the phrase twice. By 2013, Bishop had compiled a binder of every known reference to the shard, from the attic discovery to Talbot's vanished photographs. She presented her findings at a small regional history symposium, concluding with the assertion that the shard was likely still in private hands, kept out of view in the same spirit as the vow itself. Within weeks of her talk, she received an unmarked envelope in the mail containing a single sheet of paper with 6 words typed in the center. "No likeness kept. Leave it be." The postmark was from Manchester. Bishop continues to give occasional talks on the Whitford mystery, but she no longer discusses the shard in public. "Not because I'm afraid," she says in a 2018 interview, "but because some things aren't mine to make visible." By the time Carleen Bishop's quiet search tapered off, nearly a century had passed since the Whitfords had last been listed in a parish register or county roll. The house was gone, the land parcelled out, and yet the language of their absence, the vow against likeness, still surfaced in unexpected corners. A line at the bottom of a lease, a whispered refusal to be photographed at a church picnic, a curtain drawn tight, even when there was no sun to block. In 2019, a volunteer at the Clay County Library found herself sorting a donation of unmarked photographs, many of them ordinary snapshots from family albums. One image, printed on modern glossy paper, but clearly scanned from an older plate, caught her attention. It showed a parlour with a single wooden chair, a cloth draped over something tall against the wall. The edges of the cloth were nailed down. In the foreground, the faint blur of a person's arm suggested someone had stepped into the frame during the exposure. But where their hand should have partially uncovered the draped object, the image dissolved into a pale blankness, as though the emulsion had nothing to capture. The volunteer set it aside to research, but by the end of her shift, the photograph was gone. She assumed another staff member had misfiled it. Weeks later, She found a folded slip of paper tucked into the library's suggestion box. It was blank except for 3 typed words: "Do not return." No one came forward to claim responsibility. Whether that image had anything to do with the Whitfords, the Far Room, or the missing shard can't be proven. But the chain of small, deliberate erasures, the cropped scans, the vanished photographs, the curt refusals, echoes the same pattern that's run through the record from the beginning. Something is always there, briefly, before it's covered, locked away, or simply gone. From the red-penciled "Mirror, None by Vow" in 1874 to the quiet slip of paper that read "Do not return" more than a century later, the Whitford story has never really ended. It hasn't been solved, and it hasn't been forgotten. Instead, it has thinned itself across time, just enough to stay alive. Not in photographs, not in glass, but in the phrases that still travel mouth to mouth and margin to margin. No likeness kept. Not for looking. Do not bring the second self. The shard has never been found in public view. If it still exists, it sits somewhere in the dark, under a cloth, waiting for the next hand curious, or careless, enough to uncover it. And if Reeves's letter was true, then whatever stares back from that cold, silvered surface will not move when you do. It will hold your face, or something shaped like it, still and separate, as though deciding whether to give it back. Maybe the Whitfords were guarding against superstition or trauma, or nothing more than a peculiar family rule that gathered weight over the years. But maybe, just maybe, they knew the kind of truth you can only see once, and spend the rest of your life trying not to meet again. If you've heard of another family that lived without mirrors, tell me where and when. And if you've ever stood before a surface that should have shown you your reflection but didn't, I want to hear that story too. Because sometimes what doesn't look back at you is what remembers you best.